Welcome to You Version 2 podcast with me, Brendan McCauley. And today we have a fantastic guest with us, Frank King. Frank, would you like to introduce yourselves to us, please, in the audience?
Yes, I am the mental health comedian. I speak on suicide prevention as a workplace health and safety issue. It may have just crossed your mind, hold on, a comedian talking about depression and suicide. How does that work? I believe a comedian's a good choice. A couple of reasons. One, the original comedian was a court jester. Court jester's job was to speak truth to power on behalf of the powerless with humor. I believe I speak truth to the power of mental illness on behalf of those often powerless in its grip with humor. Depression and suicide run in my family. It's called generational depression and suicide. My grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her. My great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old and I screamed for days. And I myself have come close enough to ending my life in April 2010 after a Chapter 7 bankruptcy here in the US that I can tell you what the barrel of my gun tastes like. Spoiler alert, I did not pull the trigger.
And you're here talking to us, thank God.
Yeah, that's, I guess it's patently obvious. A friend of mine came up to me after a keynote once, thought he'd be funny. He goes, "Hey man, how come you didn't pull the trigger?" I go, "Hey man, could you try to sound slightly less disappointed?" So that's the humor in my suicide prevention presentations, not jokes about depression and suicide. It's funny personal stories from my mental health journey, which, given the fact it's in my DNA, has been a long journey.
And you've found ways of surviving and overcoming it and getting on with it, obviously, Frank. And you mentioned bankruptcy. I myself went through it last year and went through some low points in my life. And my wife would regularly remind me, and I would look back and think, well, was I really? But obviously I didn't realize it. And even in the course of some of my conversations with people like this recently, there has been suicide, young people in these cases I was talking about in the last couple of years during COVID and certain life challenges that come about, and people, it's just too much for them. And as a result, people decide to do other things to help or reach out or help others who are in need of help. So I think we're constantly in need of help, all of us in the world. So your approach to it, it's real. It's going to be able to help others who are willing to listen.
Yes, and I just did 4 keynotes on the same day for a construction company in Cincinnati, Ohio. The reason I did 4 keynotes is I tell people that I don't charge by the keynote, I charge by the day. So, if you want me to do a keynote in the morning, a breakout in the afternoon, I'm happy with that. Or I tell the meeting planner, I'll even acid wash the pool at the hotel. I don't care. I'm on the payroll for a day. So they took me seriously and they had me do 4 keynotes, 4 different locations, 2 in corporate settings and 1 on site at a construction project in Cincinnati at UC, the University of Cincinnati Hospital. And 180 people there, construction workers, all dressed out and in their helmet and, steel-toed boots. And because I talk about my near suicide and my family history, and I tell them I'm nuttier than a squirrel turd, it allows people the opportunity to give voice to their feelings and experiences surrounding depression, thoughts of suicide without recrimination.
Yeah.
So I do a little general Q&A at the end for everybody. And then I say, if you have a story or a question you want to ask individually, tell me, I'll hang out. So I'm hanging out and a young man comes up, a black guy, 20 years old, mid-20s. And he's crying so hard he can't speak.
Wow.
So I wait. And come to find out, he lost 3 people very close to him in the last year to violence, including his daughter who died in his arms. And he said, I have trouble sleeping. I haven't slept in 2 days. I work on the 5th floor of this building. Almost every day I consider jumping. And I got the impression he never told anybody else, his friends, his family, his coworkers, any of that. So I made sure that I connected him with HR department and resources, the gentleman who was there from human resources. I said, look, you need to take him by the hand, go find the employee assistance program binder and get him into therapy immediately because he's circling the drain. That's the power of starting the conversation by getting on stage and being vulnerable and sharing my story And it happens over and over. And a week later in Boise, Idaho, for a safety conference, one person in the morning, one person in the afternoon session came up, same, not so tragic a story, but they have what I have, which is called chronic suicidal ideation. It's little known. There's probably somebody in your listening audience who has it, doesn't know it has a name, and feels like they're just some kind of freak and all alone, because these two people came up individually, one in the morning, one in the evening. And I describe chronic suicidal ideation as this. A couple of years ago, my car broke down. I had 3 thoughts unbidden. 1, get it fixed. 2, buy a new one. 3, I could just kill myself. Because that's the way my brain works. It's always an option on the menu as a solution for problems large and small. And so both people came up and were terribly relieved to know that it wasn't just them. They're not some kind of freak. There are a goodly number of us who think that way, and it's simply a coping mechanism. And the young woman asked me, is there any medication for that? As far as I know, there's no medication for that. I take medication for depression as part of my self-care plan, but I don't think there's any meds for chronic suicidal ideation. As a matter of fact, a goodly number of clinicians, when I've said that out loud, chronic suicidal ideation, stare at me because they've never heard of it, because it's not in the big book of mental illnesses, the DSM-5.
Okay. So that you mentioned a few points there whenever when you speak and you talk out about things and opening up, all of a sudden it gives the opportunity for someone else to open up. And you mentioned also the fact of talking within the construction industry. How have you found people's reaction or opening, or how do you find that within that construction industry? Because it's quite a male dominated, chest out type of environment. What's your...
Yes, a male dominated and tough guys, chest thumping, pull yourself up by your bootstrap kind of guys, not likely to reach out for help. Male dominated in the United States, 8 out of 10 people who die by suicide are men. And construction is a male dominated industry. It's the #1 at-risk occupation in the US for suicide. And the numbers are staggering. The last time the Centers for Disease Control published numbers, they showed 1,021 deaths in construction by accident. 1,021 by accident. Same year, 2018, 5,242 construction workers died by suicide. That means you are 5 times more likely to jump off a building than you are to fall off a building, which is crazy.
Yeah. And I was talking to some colleagues in the construction world here in the UK and Ireland space. And since the boom, 2006, 7, 8, and the crash, there's actually been more suicides in the construction industry than there actually has been deaths by accident on site. And that's so striking. It's so striking, Frank. It hit me. It really did.
Male dominated, as you said, seasonal work, deadlines, expectations. When a company borrows money for a construction loan, the bank or whomever sets up a payment plan, and the payments are due at a certain time every month. Well, with the supply chain issues now, the constructions, they still have deadlines for, phases of construction. They still have deadlines to pay the construction loan payments. But if you cannot get the raw material you need to hit those deadlines construction wise, then, it's difficult to make the payments. So additional pressure due to the pandemic and supply chain issues. So, but fortunately, a number of large companies in the U.S., construction companies, have tumbled to the fact they've got a really serious problem, and they're bringing in people like me to speak to their people. And here's the metric that I didn't realize existed as to how hard my keynote is hitting home with the audience. In January, I did 7 keynotes, 2.5 days, for the biggest construction company in the United States, Turner Construction, and they're in like 18 other countries. And on site, big burly construction workers. And the meeting planner said to me when we got done with the first keynote, he said, "Frank, I noticed as I'm watching them watching you that none of them are looking at their smartphones." Which apparently is a metric nowadays. If you can disengage people from their smartphone,
That's a good metric for sure.
And he said, when you were telling the story about why you don't die by suicide, why you don't end your life by suicide, so the story about my mom and struggle she had, he said, I'm sitting next to this big burly iron worker. And as you're going through and getting to the end of your story, he said, I looked up and I could see that out of the corner of one of his eyes, a tear started to roll. He wasn't crying, he wasn't sobbing, but I reached him emotionally with the story I was telling.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the pieces of the puzzle that's missing. You have a clinician come in and talk about, rates of suicide and, and protocols to help prevent it. But to have somebody who has been so close and knows the taste of the barrel of his gun and
Real.
stared into the abyss and came back seems to have a special, power over folks, especially anybody who's struggling.
Yeah, and I would commend you for opening up and sharing, because at the end of the day, it sometimes takes that, because we as humans, we're sort of waiting for someone else to approach us, waiting for someone else to talk, to be the icebreaker, and we're on. Why do people talk to me? Why aren't they engaging with me? When if we're all behaving that way, well, then no one's ever going to reach out. So sometimes we need that icebreaker. We need that person willing to bear it all, and as a result, it can create that waterfall of emotions that come after it. I suppose the key is just being willing to reach out and ask for help. And even, you mentioned the analogy of in the construction world, the business takes out a loan and goes to do a project. Whether that's in a business world or in our own lives, we get riddled with debt as we get on in our career, and we buy this and we buy that. And then, the shit hits the fan and the crash happens and the income's not there. We're still with the debt, with the requests of every month. The same thing. That brings pressure on us. That starts to affect us mentally. And I went through that until I realized I actually need to talk to the people who are owed that money. So when you start talking to real humans, then you get some real engagement, and then you get to actually try to find a solution. But before, I was suffering in silence, thinking, oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Just talk. That's what really changed it for me. Just opening up and talking. So anyone out there listening, just do it. As Nike says, just go and talk to somebody, reach out to somebody online, in your workplace, a friend, a colleague, a family. Talk to somebody. It's the start of the path, I believe.
Well, and I did not come out as depressed and suicidal until I did my first TEDx talk in 2014. No one knew that I was living with depression and thoughts of suicide until I did the first TED talk. I decided I was going to come out on stage, come out of the mental health closet, as it were, and tell the world that I'm, depressed and suicidal, and explain it. And that allowed me to rebrand from being a comedian, which is how I started in the speaking business back in 1985. I did 7 years of comedy clubs, nonstop, no home, just club to club. But I had to rebrand as a serious speaker. And so I thought a TEDx will do it. And it did. And I just did my 7th TEDx on mental health last weekend on digital media addiction. And it's my job, really. And my clients tell me oftentimes, we just brought you in here to start the conversation, because I discovered early on, hardly anybody talks about depression and thoughts of suicide, even though one person dies by suicide every 40 seconds in the world. But if you bring it up, almost everyone has a story. I've heard some of the most amazing things, like the Black gentleman, from people I've just met, things that they've told no one.
Yep.
And so that's the power, I believe. And I believe, Brendan, that my job is to empower the audience. I'm not the hero in the piece. I say to them, look, you can make a difference. You can save a life, and you can do it by doing something as simple as what we're doing right here, and that is starting a conversation. Because the good news is 8 out of 10 people who are suicidal are ambivalent. They cannot make up their mind, and 9 out of 10 give hints in the last week leading up to an attempt, which means the vast majority of people want to be saved. The vast majority of people can be saved if you know what to look and listen for. And that's what I teach: signs and symptoms of depression and thoughts of suicide, what to do, what to say, how to find resources. Because again, the majority of people can be saved. And my job is to empower the audience to recognize the signs and symptoms and give them permission to step up and ask about,
Yeah.
are you okay?
And
Not, yeah.
and in that, I suppose, like a lot of us males, I leaned on drink, at the weekend drinking, and oh, it's Friday, great, all the pressures that work, the drink will take it away. And there was a low point, and my wife actually, when we look back on it, says, "Brendan, I thought you were going to commit suicide at some point." Now, I never thought I was going to commit suicide or thought about committing suicide, but she was obviously concerned how I was behaving or what I was doing. And if someone had asked me, "Oh, Brendan, do you have mental health problems?" At that point, I was, "No, I'm fine. I'm just stressed with work and this and that and personal problems." But whenever I started to educate myself into the concept of, mental health, we have a mind, we need to look after the health of it, the well-being, signs of how we can be affected, anxiety, depression, stress, all these things that I was doing, I was being affected by them, and I was leaning on crutches to try and overcome it. And all it was doing was making it worse. And so many of us do it. So many of us have a similar story. And as you say, just breaking that ice and giving someone that opportunity to come out and talk about that suicide issue or someone they know, because as you say, we all have someone we know who's been affected by it in some way, and more so in recent years. And these conversations I'm having with people, there's people sharing with me, and I'm shocked and saddened. But as a result, these people are pushing on, and they're trying to help others to avoid the circumstance. And it's speechless because it's such a heavy subject, and but it needs to be spoken about, Frank. So how can we speak about it more? How can we? I'm talking out loud here as if to the audience. What can we do to become aware of ourselves and to talk and help with each other? Because May is mental health awareness. And especially in construction, we have mental health weeks and things like that. And sometimes, I'm not saying that they are, but sometimes it seems that businesses may tick a box for the sake of ticking a box, but actually getting into real conversations and helping the workers, helping the staff, helping the
Well, I
guy
think,
digging the hole in the ground.
yeah, the key is starting the conversation. And the key to that, I do believe, is knowing what to look and listen for. I mean, the signs of depression, a couple, three, have trouble getting up in the morning, maybe late to work, rallies in the afternoon, almost like a different person. Eat too much or can't eat, sleep too much or just can't sleep, and let their personal hygiene go. You see them, you think, wow, the hair's a little dirty, clothes aren't quite so clean. Maybe they're having trouble getting out of bed in the morning. Run a little wash and take a shower. So what do you say to somebody you believe may be depressed? You don't say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, turn that frown upside down. Have you tried fish oil? What you do say is, I'm here for you and I mean it. I know you're not lazy, crazy, or self-absorbed. I know that depression is a mental illness. Here's the good news. With time and treatment, things will get better. I will take the time, help you get the treatment. And then you have to ask them, this is the hard part, are you having thoughts of suicide? Just like that. And if you can't ask that question, you find somebody who can. And if you can't, call me and I'll ask them. Let's say they don't admit they're having thoughts of suicide, but your gut tells you, your intuition screaming, I think this person is circling the drain. How would you know? Well, they talk about death and dying quite frequently. You catch them Googling death and dying. How do you die by? Death and dying appears as a theme in their music, their artwork, their writing. They're giving away prized possessions as part of getting their affairs in order. They want to make sure the prized possessions go to the people they want them to go to when they're gone.
Okay, yeah.
They're acquiring means to die by suicide, whether it's purchasing a firearm or stockpiling medication. And here's a counterintuitive one that I think is very dangerous. They've been depressed for a long time and they're happy for no reason. And you're happy because finally they're happy. The problem is they may be happy because they've chosen time, place, and method, and they know the pain is coming to an end, which, by the way, is something that a lot of people don't understand, that when you're suicidal, it's most often not about wanting to kill yourself. It's about ending the pain. Somebody contacted me after Naomi Judd passed away by suicide. And they said, why would somebody who has everything to live for want to die? And I said, well, chances are she did not want to die. Chances are she simply wanted to end the pain.
Yeah.
And so that's why
Escape
they
the
become
pain.
happy at the end, because they know it's coming to an end. So the question is, how would you know somebody was suicidal if they didn't admit? Well, I'm sorry, what would you say to somebody you think is suicidal? You would not say you're looking for attention. You're being melodramatic. Nobody who talks about it ever does it. But if they admit they're having thoughts of suicide, what do you say? Well, you say, do you have a plan? And if they have a plan, what is your plan? And if it's detailed, time, place, and method, ideally, they'll let you take them to a mental health facility for an evaluation. If not, then perhaps call the suicide prevention lifeline in whatever country you happen to be living in.
Yeah.
Samaritans, I think, in the UK, perhaps. And
Brilliant.
there's a text line now in the US for younger people, because younger people are more forthcoming in text. If you text the word help to 741-741, there'll be somebody about your age on the other end.
Fantastic.
Now, let's say they are suicidal, but they don't have a really well-defined plan. What do you say? Well, there's nothing in the literature I've read or the classes I've taken that addresses this. So a psychiatrist friend and I came up with, if they're suicidal, but the plan's not detailed, what do you say? We decided you should say, okay, well, tell me, are you going to kill yourself? And if they say no, you say, okay, then tell me why not. Make them give voice to whatever's keeping them here, because something is keeping them here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Excellent.
lastly, if they're suicidal and they're in immediate danger to themselves or others, you have no choice but to call the police. In the US, in many states, if you do that and the police come and they believe they're actively suicidal, they'll put them in front of a judge, and the judge will decide whether they get a 3-day lockdown, involuntary detention order. And they will be mad, and they will unfriend you on Facebook, but they will be alive.
That's the important thing, the important result, isn't it?
Yes, mad
Keeping
as they
them
will
alive.
be.
Wow. It's powerful stuff, Frank, that you're dealing with, and powerful story and help that you're bringing on such a heavy subject. And I certainly, in Ireland, someone could shut me down and unfriend me or whatever, but it's not talked about in the common ether of the news or the journalism, because it's like, if we talk about it, well, then maybe it's encouraging it, or but yet it's happening, but no one's talking about it, and it just seems so wrong. It just seems, why is that? Why would that be the case?
Well, there's a stigma to mental illness. There's a whole separate stigma to the thoughts of suicide. It's an uncomfortable topic. As my mother would say, we don't talk about that in polite company. So it takes someone like you or I to give them permission to give voice. I feel like the permission fairy. When I utter the words depression and suicide out loud, it's like they've been sitting around waiting for somebody to mention it so they could share.
The hand up, sir. Can I go next? Can I go next?
Exactly. And but it's a difficult. I think part of the problem is mental illness and thoughts of suicide are, I believe, where alcoholism was 100 years ago. There's a reason that alcoholics were anonymous. AA was anonymous because back then people felt like alcoholism was a character flaw or a moral failing. And I think that those feelings persist around mental illness and thoughts of suicide. That it's somehow your fault. You just need to snap out of it, which is one of my favorite. Just snap out of it. I said to somebody who said that to me about my depression, thoughts of suicide, I said, would you ever say that to a diabetic? You're taking insulin for diabetes. You need to just snap out of it, because they're both chronic illnesses. Yeah. It's somebody said to me, I'd never take an antidepressant. Of course you wouldn't. You're not depressed.
Frank, as I mentioned at the start when we were introducing ourselves, the concept I'm trying to push out there is to try and help us all live happier lives, whether it's have a happier workplace, happier personal life, and as a result, impact and help others. Have you any any things that you do to try and find that happier place, or good routines or good habits that maintain a stable mind?
Yes, and I've said this many times. I'm probably the most positive and happy suicidal person you'll ever meet. It's not not about happy for me because it's in my genes. I mean, it's just the way I'm wired. And I believe I'm not broken. I was made this way because I believe, and I encourage people to do this. Um, I've found that my depression and thoughts of suicide seem to simply be the flip side of my creativity and imagination. It's the
Mhm.
same brain. I can teach you to write stand up and perform stand up. I cannot teach you to process the incoming information the way my brain does. And I believe that's like a superpower that's tied to the disability that I have. So I encourage people to treat the disability and then find that ability that perhaps they have due to the conditions they have, and
Mhm.
celebrate that and energize that and wrap your arms around that. And pretty much every parent I've ever talked to that with an issue, I always seem to have some really amazing ability. I believe in a self-care plan. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I can't tell you how many keynotes I did virtually teaching neurotypical people how to create a self-care plan. The title of the talk was Social Distancing and Staying Sane. Don't worry so much about your mentally ill friends, because most of the people that I know that are high functioning mentally ill have a self-care plan, because we
Mhm.
wake up in an uncertain world every day, whether there's a pandemic or not. We have to figure out somehow to get out of bed. So it's very simple. Diet. I'm on the keto diet and I do intermittent fasting. Exercise. Try to exercise 4 or 5 times a week.
Mhm.
Um, Good night's sleep is restorative. Nowadays there's people brag about how little sleep they get by on, which I think yeah, it's just I get by on 3 hours a night. Well, I wish they go. I got 8 hours last night.
Yeah, yeah,
So
good for you, Mr. 3 hour man.
yeah,
Try and find
diet,
more
exercise.
hours in your
Yeah,
night.
yeah, diet, exercise, good night's sleep, meditation twice a day, guided meditations. It's an MP3 called the Cat Napper,
Mhm.
and finally medication. I take a small amount of antidepressant. It doesn't make me giddy, but it just takes the edge off.
And that's something there, Frank. Have
Been
we
doing a
lost you?
documentary on a psychotropic medication. And in general, 1/3 of the people who take a particular med love it. 1/3, it works okay. The last third, they hate it and have to taper off and try something else. So if you are in the works okay or I hate it category with your meds, there's now a DNA cheek swab test. They take your DNA from a cheek swab and they try to match it to the, let's say, antidepressant that works best with your particular metabolism. So had
Mhm.
mine not worked so well, I would have gone straight to the Q-tip and the DNA swab and figured out what worked best with my metabolism. There are half a dozen companies in the world that do it, a couple $100 tops to get it done. Most insurances cover it. So if your med's not working, you definitely need, I would say, get the DNA test to see if
Yeah.
because what happens is it cuts down on the went on it, didn't work, tapered off. Went on it, didn't work, tapered off. Well, you're a little less of a lab rat because those taper off periods are unpleasant.
Okay.
And so anyway, that would be my advice. So and here's the thing, Brendan, about the self-care plan: diet, exercise, good night's sleep, medication. If you notice, the through line in all those is they're all things that I can control.
Absolutely. And the thing I've discovered, Frank, they're all simple things that we can do. Like, I try to have a good morning routine. Well, I don't try, I do. I make sure I get a good sleep. I wake up in the morning, I'm grateful and thankful for being alive, or whatever I've had. I hydrate myself. I do exercise,
Yep.
prepare myself, meditate for a bit. All simple things we can control and we can do. We can make them as long or short as we want. But how simple are they? And they are theoretically all help us become happier individuals. There's no big, oh, you need to tell yourself a load of jokes, or you need to think this and think that. Simple lifestyle changes can be
Yeah.
have the biggest impact. And that's what's changed me the most. Just creating good, new, positive habits. So
Yeah. Routine. And I tell people that they interviewed an astronaut who'd been in the space station for a year, pretty much by himself. And they asked him, that is truly social isolation. How did you survive? And he said, very simply, I have a routine. I go to bed same time, get up same time, exercise same time, eat same time, binge watch Netflix the same time, every day. So I would recommend, in addition to the 5 things I mentioned, I would have a routine, because the world is an uncertain place. So again, I think you need to control the things you can control, let the rest of it go.
Important stuff. Important stuff. Frank, have to thank you so much for your time. And I don't want to take up all your time because I was late. And thank you for hanging in and joining. I really appreciate it. Life is busy. We have to deal with it and get on with it. I didn't want to give up and lose the opportunity to chat with yourself. And I believe our conversation is powerful. And I'm really look forward to sharing it, because I know there's plenty out there who can get some comfort or solace from it, and be encouraged to ask for help from others. And I truly believe if we don't ask, how can we receive? So let's just start asking.
My goal is to save 1 life a day, Brendan. That's my goal. So maybe somebody who is hearing this now has chronic suicidal ideation and didn't realize it had a name, or maybe they've now been empowered to speak up and let people know what they're dealing with.
And Frank, how can people find out about you, more about you? Because you've obviously plenty to share.
Well, on the internet, my website is thementalhealthcomedian.com, thementalhealthcomedian.com. 2 co-authors and I have 4 books on men's mental health. If you go to my website, thementalhealthcomedian.com, and put an email address in, you can download the first one, an audiobook. I narrated it, unabridged, for free.
Very good.
And if you run a business and you're looking to make mental health a priority, one of my co-authors helped to create a website called workplacesuicideprevention.com, workplacesuicideprevention.com. And what it does, encourages employers to take the pledge to make mental health a health and safety priority and there's exercises and all sorts of resources for companies that want to take the pledge. And here's why, Brandon. The 80% of people who die by suicide are 18 to 65 years old. And where are those people most of the time? At work. The workplaces where all those populations cross over. That's the center of the Venn diagram is the workplace. So that's why they created workplace suicide prevention, so that employers, because employers often think of how much physical health costs their company, but they often overlook how much mental health problems cost the company. And if you're in the construction business, there's something called presenteeism. Are you familiar with presenteeism?
Is it something similar to absenteeism?
Yes, absenteeism, you are physically and mentally not at work. Presenteeism, you are physically there, but you're mentally checked out, whether it's mental illness or bankruptcy or divorce. And the problem, if you're working in an office, that's not such a big deal. But if you're working on a construction site and there are other people depending on you in part for their safety, and you're checked out mentally, then you're putting the entire team at risk. So that's one of the 100%. Reasons why you need to make mental health a health and safety priority.
Yep. Actually, in my space, in my work, it's safety is no accident, safety is for life, all those things. Safety is a priority in my mind, and it has been, because we work in the electrical world, and electricity is an invisible killer. So it's something that I'm very close to my heart. I want to share more with more and more people, as you say, to help them.
Well, and when I do speak, I say, look, here's the deal. The company that hired me to come in here obviously cares, otherwise they wouldn't have brought me in. And they can find another journeyman plumber, another journeyman electrician. You just call the union hall and they'll send somebody. What we're trying to protect is, your family cannot find another father or a mother. Your friends, you are a friend and a father or a mother, a brother, a sister. you are irreplaceable in those roles. As a journeyman, you're replaceable, but in these other roles, you are irreplaceable.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that you're safe at work, safe at home, and safe in the meantime.
On that note, Frank, I'd love to continue talking all day, but I'll have to cut it short there. And I thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you. And I'll share all the details you mentioned there in the links so that people can check it out. But it's certainly worth checking them out. And thank you from the bottom of my heart, Frank.
My pleasure, and stay safe and help start the conversation as you are doing right this minute.